You're listening to the Arts in Isolation podcast, brought to you by Asia House.
I'm Juan de Lara, cultural programmer at Asia House, and we're very pleased to be launching the new series of podcasts, Arts in Isolation, our contribution and response to the current situation we're facing with coronavirus. The purpose of the series is, of course, to entertain and educate, bringing you some of the hottest topics and cultural practitioners from around the world. This first episode of today is part of our ongoing series, Converging Paths, Creative Encounters with the Islamic World. Converging Paths is in partnership with the Barakat Trust and made possible with the kind support from the Al-Tajir Trust and the Al-Han Trust for Culture. Saif Al-Rashidi, director of the Barakat Trust, has also a message to share with us.
Converging Paths has been really popular, and we're really excited to take it online through Arts in Isolation to reach many more people in different countries around the world. I think at a time when no access to museums is possible and people are quite isolated physically, the digital world enables us to connect, to understand, and also to interact with people whom we might not have the chance to meet if we go to museums or cultural institutions. So it's a very good way of bridging gaps and doing new and creative things.
Yes, Saif, you're right. And that's why today we wanted to look at one of the largest cultural organizations in the UK. And I have here with me Venetia Porter. Venetia is the curator of Islamic and Contemporary Middle East art at the British Museum, where she has been since 1989. She has curated two major exhibitions at the British Museum, Word into Art, 2006, and Hajj, Journey to the Heart of Islam in 2012, and was the lead curator of the Al-Bukhari Foundation Gallery of the Islamic World, which opened in October 2018. Her research and publications range from Arabic inscriptions to contemporary art, and thousands of people have been very much informed by your work. So we have great gratitude for it. Venetia, welcome. And I'm very interested in learning, how do you envision the possibility of including contemporary Middle Eastern art in the British Museum collections? Must have been a tough endeavor.
Well, Juan, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your wonderful series of podcasts. And I'm just really, really glad to be here talking to you, even though we're having to do it virtually because of this coronavirus. And I'm just going to imagine that you and I just sitting having a coffee together in the Great Court at the British Museum, as we sometimes do, which is so nice. So as far as contemporary art, I mean, this is a topic that I've been interested in for quite a long time. And, I started really trying to, even in a very small way, build this collection from as early as the 1990s. And in those days, what we were looking for was art that connected with historic, if you like, Islamic art. So the first pieces that we acquired were to do with calligraphy, artists like Ali Omar Hermes or Ahmed Mustafa, for example. And the collection kind of grew from there. But the big challenge, even then, and actually which continues to now, is of course, the nature of this material is enormous. It's not, when you're talking about Middle Eastern art, whether it's modern or contemporary, you're not talking about work that necessarily has any connection with what you could call Islamic culture or Islamic art. I mean, this is a huge topic, but one of the challenges is, if you have these collections of Islamic art and in a museum such as ours at the British Museum, how do you try and incorporate these works within that collection? Can you set up dialogues between, Islamic art, in inverted commas, and modern and contemporary art? And so this is a subject that I've been really wrestling with for some years, but which really came to the fore, in a sense, when we opened the new gallery, the Al-Bukhari Foundation Gallery of the Islamic World, because that was the first time in the British Museum that we were actually able to have a really decent place to put the contemporary, and it's for people who've been to our gallery, and I'll give you the online resources later, but it's in the second gallery, and at the end of it we've got this lovely space where we do put contemporary. So it's really a challenge as to how you can make these two kind of aspects of art, which are often very different, how you can make them work together.
Because I'm not quite aware, was the British Museum displaying Islamic art before you arrived to the institution?
Well, I mean, traditionally, the British Museum, I mean, as with many museums, a gallery which called itself a Gallery of Islamic Art. I mean, one can debate the nature of that term. You know, that's a whole other discussion,
Yeah.
really. But in that gallery, what you had was what is called Islamic art. So that's really basically the material culture of the Islamic world, but focused on art as it was then. So you take a chronological approach. You take the art of the early dynasties, the Umayyads, the Abbasids. You carry on and you show, art associated with some of the, the great dynasties, the cultural moments, the patronage, right up until the 19th century. Now, traditionally, Islamic art is often thought to kind of end, as it were. I mean, I'm using a lot of inverted commas, like a lot of galleries don't go beyond the mid-19th century, because it's at that point that scholars thought, well, actually, that is the end of that, that everything after that is not so interesting, is often just pastiche and so on. So that was a kind of rationale, which actually it still pertains in some museums today. Things seem to kind of stop in the mid-19th century. The other thing that was happening when a lot of these galleries were set up is that you tended to look at what is generally called or referred to as like the central Islamic lands, so that the material that you're looking at is from like Syria, Egypt, Iran, Central Asia, and then you have Mughal India or Islamic India as well, sometimes incorporated, sometimes separate. And so one of the things that we tried to do when we started the thinking about our new gallery was actually, what is the Islamic world? And in fact, you really need to look at it in a much broader way, really. And that's one of the things that we tried to do in our gallery, was to kind of look at it from sort of West Africa to Southeast Asia, from the 7th century until the present day. So when you have that kind of approach, then there is your framework and your rationale for being able to include the contemporary within that.
Which is very exciting, because it's amazing to see these huge organizations in the UK opening up to a new audience, to new publics. And I wonder if there is a strategy behind the British Museum, perhaps to attract a new and younger audience, the millennials, to come on through the doors. And I see shocking exhibitions such as the manga exhibition, which you hosted, I believe, last year. And do you think also the contemporary strand of your collection is also trying to engage with the wider public and with the wider audience?
I think, it's a really important question. I think there is a huge realization that our audience is wanting something far beyond the traditional, what they used to get when they came to the museum. When I first joined, 30 years ago now, and so yes, I think it's very important that things are displayed in a way that do attract people, that make connections with people. So yes, having that amazing manga exhibition curated by my colleagues in the Japanese department, I mean, that was huge for the museum, and that brought in absolutely untold audiences who had never been to the institution before, who just weren't expecting that sort of thing at all. And in the same way, actually, when we did the Hajj exhibition in 2012, that brought in audiences who'd never been to the British Museum before, and that was actually very exciting for us. And it, in terms of the thinking that went on for the Al-Bukhari Foundation Gallery, certainly in my mind was very much the reaction of the public when they came to see the Hajj exhibition there, because in that exhibition were objects of daily life as well as historic objects. that's one of the things we tried to do very much in the Al-Bukhari Gallery, was to not just tell a story about art, but about actually material culture in the broadest sense. And when you think of it as material culture, you sort of everything is there. I kind of call it evidence in a sense. It's all about how people lived in the past. What stories can you tell about that? And you can do that through art, of course, but you can do it through archaeology and objects found on rubbish tips and that sort of thing, as well as the contemporary stories too.
Seems a good strategy then. And I hear that you're preparing a major exhibition for autumn this year. Is that right?
Well, it's an exhibition that I'm very excited about, actually. It's called Reflections, Contemporary Art of the Middle East and North Africa. And this is basically an exhibition that has really at its heart the collecting that has taken place in terms of the modern and contemporary since 2009. And this is a very important moment for me and for the museum. This is when we formed a patrons group called CAMIA, Contemporary Modern Middle East Art. And this patrons group allowed us to start to really think in a really much more important way about what we should be acquiring in the collection as regards modern and contemporary. And so this exhibition is going to have about 150 works, mostly collected the last 10 years, but some from before as well. And it's going to be held in the Prints and Drawings Gallery at the top of the back of the museum. Very nice. And it's a free exhibition, which is very important. And some of the exhibition will be in this room 90, but some other pieces are going to be included in the Al-Bukhari Gallery as well. So it's an exhibition in kind of two parts, geographically, as it were.
And in terms of topics that this exhibition is going to be covering, what do you think is the most important in terms of how you relate to your audience, and not only with the artists, but when people, as you were discussing before, that people have in their head some stereotype or misconception about the Islamic world, and when they come in to see your exhibition Reflections, what do you think is the most important aspect you will be addressing?
Well, I think what I'd like people to take away with them is really the range and extraordinary nature of this collection. It's a really very interesting collection because we focus just on work on paper. And that includes drawings and prints and photography and artist books as well. And what I want people to really take away with them is how extensive the material is and the range of topics that are covered. And it's nothing to do really with the Islamic world. I mean, that's very much a separate topic. That's something else. I mean, for me, I'm very clear in my mind that I don't think of this material as contemporary Islamic art. It's a debate that I have a lot with different colleagues who also curate that material. But for me, this is actually about artists working today. They will address a whole range of subjects, from whether they're inspired by Islamic art, if you like, or whether they're actually talking about contemporary politics. It's a vast spectrum of material, and within a structure. Because all exhibitions have to have a structure and a series of narratives. This is what I'm trying to explore.
Currently, we're going through very dire situations, and I wonder, what do you think the impact of this coronavirus epidemic is going to have on the exhibition display, or even on the exhibition itself?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that by October we will have an exhibition, and that hopefully this dreadful virus that has just completely turned our whole world upside down in so many ways is going to be over, or is going to begin to be a memory. Obviously, not for those poor people who suffered so much. I mean, in terms of of how artists are going to represent that. I mean, I think that's already
Yeah.
happening actually, which is quite interesting. I mean, the thing in terms of Middle Eastern artists that I think is so incredibly fascinating is the extent to which the ones that I encounter and whose work we have in the collection are really addressing very contemporary issues, often from the countries from which they come, whether they live in those countries or whether they are in diaspora. And there's an extraordinary engagement with that, and very imaginative ways of talking about issues, about whether it's whether it's Palestine or whether it's the wars in Iraq or the Lebanese civil wars, or topics such as issues around which affect women, honor killings and education and all of that. And this is the thing that drives me in terms of building the collection, is that I see these works which are just addressing these topics in such an incredibly fascinating and subtle way. And so I've no doubt that as far as this dreadful corona, that there will be really interesting and imaginative things, coming up in the future.
Yeah, indeed. I think 2020 has given artists, particularly of the Middle East, quite a lot of material to deal with. If we consider that at the beginning of the year, we had the Iran-USA disagreement in early January, we had the refugee crisis in Turkey and Greece by mid-February, and now we have this coronavirus issue. It's when one think of perhaps say, for example, the Guernica, a piece of art that captures traumatizing moments in history, one wonders what's going to come out from these very creative and talented minds. And as you say, we should be very much tuned, because I think this has been your research for many years as well. Is that right? How social and world situations has affected artistic production?
Well, yes, and in a way, they kind of jump out at me, these works. So it's just the really imaginative ways in which an artist kind of expresses pain and loss and separation and exile. I think is really extraordinary. I'm thinking of, for example, this Palestinian artist Hazem Harb from Gaza. He's got this amazing series which is called Tag Series, and so he's used the kind of social media thing of when you put these little boxes around people or places, and you put the little tag. Normally you say what the place or that person is. He's done them without identifying them, so that you might have a picture of a person or a building or an olive tree with a little box around it, so he's drawing attention to that topic in this very subtle way. And he talks about in his interviews about how as a child he loved to collect old photographs, and and he's kept them, and they're part of a memory. And so each time you delve into somebody's story, it just kind of opens up an entire world for me.
Venetia, I think you're also an expert in Yemen. Is that right? That was part of your research when you did your PhD?
Yes, well, I'd say I'm an expert in it any longer, unfortunately, because this was my PhD that I did, yes, some time ago. It was a wonderful PhD, actually. It was about a dynasty. They're called the Bani Tahir, and they were ruling in Yemen in the 15th and early 16th century. And they built wonderful architecture, and they were incredibly interesting historically, actually. And yes, so I spent a lot of time in Yemen. It's a country that I absolutely deeply love. And even from when I finished my thesis, I would kind of go back there as much as I can. I became kind of tour guide, in order to be able to take people around this absolutely incredible country. So I feel hugely privileged, really, to have actually experienced being there and to have met so many people. And of course, now it's an absolute tragedy what's happening there. It's so sad. It's one of the it always was a very poor country, but it's suffering so much now.
Well,
really.
definitely not in terms of culture, one would argue. And my question is, how are you relating to Yemen in your upcoming exhibition or in your current permanent collection? How well represented is, or if it's not, how do you think we should further engage with these nations or cultures that are being threatened in such way?
Well, at the moment, I mean, it's really something that I should have addressed long before, is how to get more works by Yemeni artists in the collection. We have just a couple only, unfortunately, but it is something that I really want to do now. And we did a conference, part of the Shabak Festival last July, called Making Art in Syria and Yemen Today. And through that experience, actually, I met a number of really interesting Yemeni artists. And my plan now, as soon as I've sort of finished with the book and with the preparations for the exhibition, is to actually really try and focus on that, because it's really amazed me that when I learnt through this conference that despite all of the difficulties, that people were able to make art in Yemen today, really quite important work, and that we all need to know about and to understand. And I think one of the tragedies of Corona, but is that, of course, you listen to the news, well, it is about Corona. It's not, the rest, everything else is on. The conflicts are still going on in Yemen, in Syria. Refugees are still coming across to the Greek islands. And, none of that has stopped. And yet our focus, totally understandably, has been so much on now. But I think my feeling is that as this continues, because there's the novelty is going to kind of wear off. We've only been in shutdown for a week, but people are already finding really imaginative ways of kind of being in touch with people, and already there are a lot of really interesting kind of online resources now you can access, and virtual exhibitions happening. Friends in Dubai, we should have been actually at Art Dubai last week, and they're already putting these exhibitions of the galleries online. There are other resources too, and actually I think maybe by sitting at home and maybe one can be more reflective. I think I'm certainly using this time to try and think more about what are the different things that I could be doing actually in the future, rather than we're all of us most of the time just reacting on the day-to-day, aren't we? I've just got to finish this email, I've just got to do this, or in my case it's like, oh no, there's 15 emails I haven't responded to and they're all really important. But actually with this, maybe this is a time to reflect, and those of us like me who are privileged enough to be in a cultural institution such as mine and able to do things, maybe that's the next stage really, is how can one put this time, this enforced period of isolation, how can we actually put that to good use?
Yeah, I think those are very inspiring words to wrap up. And yes, indeed, it's a very good time to reflect, to be resilient. For example, for us here at Asia House, we rely on people coming to us for talks, for music, movies, seminars, workshops, and we had to see all activities stopped overnight. We had to reinvent ourselves very quickly and come up with the idea of arts in isolation. And what we wanted is to be representative of the different voices that comprise our cultural scene. For us, it's now a new episode of getting more people, larger outreach, and as Saif was saying, spreading our voice not only to London as we usually would do, but also all over the UK and to the world. This conversation, Venetia, had the purpose of inspiring new audiences and inviting them to also organizations like yours, like the British Museums, which are breaking boundaries. And as the museum is shut, can people access the collection online, or is there any digital platform that the museum offers?
Yeah, I mean, I think all museums are now trying to work out how best they can do this. And yes, the British Museum does have an online platform. You can go into the collections online. There's a lot of work that's being done on that facility at the moment. In terms of the gallery that I mentioned, the Al
Yeah.
Bukhari Gallery, we have a dedicated website for that gallery, and so that you can at least go in and see some of the objects. And what we have actually alongside that, which is really lovely, is a whole range of these interviews that we've done with scholars and artists, and so that you can actually listen to, for example, you can listen to Idris Khan, whose work is in the gallery at the moment, this beautiful 21 stones, and you can listen to him talking about how he made it. You can, and on the topic of music, you can listen to Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens, as some people know him, talking about music and what that has meant to him as a Muslim, and all sorts of things. Ahmed Angawi, who made our beautiful screens in the gallery, and you can hear him and watch him make those beautiful Mangura screens that we're so lucky enough to have. So those are kind of little snippets, like the 8-10 minutes. You can go in and you can listen to those. Those are really nice, actually. So, and then around the museums, the Oceania section, the prints and drawings section, also you can have little virtual tours. So it's beginning. I hope that along with this podcast, we can put up a few pictures as well of the exhibition, which would be nice, I think.
Yes, indeed. And we'll put the link also for people to get access to the Al Bukhari, as you were saying. I think that would be an amazing complement to this podcast. So you'll find the link in the main website or in the newsletter if you have received this podcast through the newsletter. And Venetia, I think, thank you so much, because it has been wonderful that you share your input with us, particularly in this time. I know everybody's busy trying to reinvent themselves and trying to come up with new strategies, new ideas. So I wish you a very successful exhibition. I hope that once all the coronavirus situation regularizes, you can also come to Asia House. It would be wonderful to welcome you and to have you as part of more editions of Converging Paths.
Well, thank you so much, Juan, and I'm a huge admirer of what you and your colleagues do at Asia House, and of course of the Barakat Trust as well. And I hope that with these conversations they start a dialogue, because the important thing is that we should all be talking to each other more, and maybe that's one of the things that could happen more in the future when we all go back to our kind of ordinary lives, that we kind of remember that there was a moment when we had a bit more time to talk to each other, and that would be very nice, and it would be an absolute pleasure to come and see you at Asia House, of course. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Venetia. It has been a huge privilege, and thank you all of you who are listening to our Arts in Isolation podcast. We're preparing a new episode each week, so please stay tuned. Visit regularly our website, asiahousearts.org, or much better, sign up to receive our newsletter. You will receive regular updates with a range of music, recipes, and digital content to help you fight the boredom. See you all next week. Take care of yourself and stay safe.
You were listening to the Arts in Isolation podcast, brought to you by Asia House. For more information, please visit our website, asiahousearts.org.